Hi, I'm Nick Salazar for TriRig.com, and this video is going to go over the installation and adjustment of the Omega SV brake. This is the back of my Felt B2. I'm about to remove the original TRP brake and install the Omega SV. I've taken out the crank to make it a little bit easier for you to see the installation, but that's not required in order to install the brake in most cases. It may be necessary if you have really large chain rings and can't access some of the adjustment bolts. You're going to begin by removing these bolt covers. They just come right off by hand. You may need to use pliers if they're a little tight, but it shouldn't be too bad. Next, you're going to remove these two bolts at the end of each pivot of the brake, and you're going to save them because we're going to need them later. Each of these bolts has a little rubber O-ring at the end of it. You can just take that off and discard it. You won't need that. Alright, next you want to remove all the cable and housing from the original brake. You remove the brake by pulling it straight off of the posts. It may require a little bit of effort to do so because the springs, which are keeping this returning to center, also try and keep it on the bike a little bit. But with just a little bit of force, you can get these off without too much of a problem. They should come off whole with their springs and the spring covers intact. So you can save all of this equipment if you ever want it for the future, but we're not going to need anything except for those two bolts that we saved from earlier. You're going to take whichever backplate you're using, whether that's the one with the cable hanger or the one without, and slide it onto these posts. It should fit just perfectly. Next, you're going to take the arms and levers. You want to slide them into each other first and then slide them onto the posts. And now you're going to install the spring. This is probably the trickiest part of the whole installation, but if you do it right, it's actually very simple. Where the spring terminates at the end, there is a corresponding recess on the inside face of this brake arm and of the opposite brake arm. And so the best way to get that to catch is to take the spring from underneath and simply slide it straight up. It can be helpful to temporarily put these bolts back in place just to keep the lever and arm assemblies from falling off as you attempt to put the spring on. And here's what the spring looks like when it's fully installed. You can see it really just hugs right around the pivot posts there and latches into a little recess on the underside of each brake arm. It's a little difficult to see, but it's right in there. So that's all. You can now remove the bolts on the pivot posts again, and we'll proceed with the installation. Next, you're going to set the wedge in place just like so. We're going to route housing directly into the cable hanger right here and bring the wedge into position. Now, the most critical aspect of any Omega installation, whether it's the original Omega or the SV, is ensuring that there's appropriate cable tension in the brake at rest. If there's slack in the cable, then you're going to spend the first part of your lever throw just taking up the slack, and that's going to rob you of braking power later on in lever travel. So what you want to do is not only make sure this is nice and tight and taut when you pull on this, but to put a little bit of extra tension in the cable at rest. The way I like to do that is by bringing this wedge up just a little bit compared to its position at rest, and now tighten when it's like this. With tension in the cable like this, just the slightest pull of the lever is going to cause it to start moving, and that's what's going to give you the best braking performance that the Omega has to offer. You just want to trim your cable somewhere around here. You can add a cable end here if you're worried about the end frame. Then we're going to put the front plate on here. There is a little recess in the back of the front plate that corresponds to this protrusion on the wedge. So that's what helps keep the wedge centered and in place. So you just want to wiggle this a little bit until the wedge finds its spot. The final step would just be to install your pad holders and the pads. Those are pretty straightforward, so I'm not going to go over that. One thing you might notice with this installation is that these levers are just ever so slightly deployed, maybe just by a millimeter or so. That's totally acceptable, and it's actually nice because now I know that there is definitely tension in the system at rest, because otherwise it wouldn't be deployed at all. You don't want to have it so deployed that the arms are halfway out, and you also don't want so much slack that you're wasting half of your lever throw just pulling it out. This is pretty much an ideal installation. It's going to give you really responsive braking, plenty of braking power, and obviously it looks wonderful. You can adjust stance width via the set screws at the side here. You can adjust pad holder height with the slots in the brake arms here. And for travel, we made it a little bit more convenient on the SV. There is a slot right here in the cable hanger, so that if you just need to get a little extra slack for travel, you pop that front plate off and you can just remove the wedge from this whole assembly. So now that's looking a lot nicer and a lot cleaner than the original TRP that was on there, and it's going to give you wonderful braking performance as well. To get your own Omega SV, head to tririg.com/store, and for a lot more information and photos, check out the articles on tririg.com. Thanks a lot.